In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, that never was it known that anyone who fled to thy protection, implored thy help, or sought thy intercession was left unaided. Inspired by this confidence, I fly unto thee, O Virgin of Virgins, my Mother. To thee do I come, before thee I stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not my petitions, but in thy mercy hear and answer me. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Okay, Boomer. We're here with Ryan the Retrograde, John the Son of Thunder. This is your Thunder and Lightning show. We're going to talk about baby boomers today. Did they mess up the church? And that's what we're going to get to. So the baby boomer generation, born in 1946, and it goes until 1964. So in 2019, their ages would be 55 to 73. So, do you have any thoughts on the baby boomers?
Well, I suggested to John that we should do a show on the boomer question. It's been a topic where there's been some conversations in the comment boxes. Apparently there's a meme on Twitter about OK Boomer. And I said to you, we need to come up with a final solution to the boomer question. And I think, though, the remarks that I wanted to say is I think that the boomers, though they do bear responsibility for some of the ills in society, they're not entirely 100% to blame, because if you look, for instance, at the state of the church was put into a bad situation even before the Second Vatican Council. And as you mentioned, the boomers weren't even being born until 46. So at the close of the Second Vatican Council in 1965, they're less than 20 years old. So they obviously had nothing to do with what happened at Vatican II, and they had nothing to do with what happened before Vatican II. But they're not absolved of responsibility because they are the people who are between 55 and 73 years old now. And so these are, for the most part, people of perhaps your grandparents, your parents' generation, or depending on, it might even be you. And these people make up the bulk of the voting bloc in the United States of America. They make up the bulk of Catholics in the pews at most parishes. And so they are important.
And they also make up a bulk of the bishops. So this is why baby boomers are, getting so trashed on Twitter. Well, not trashed, but like people are criticizing them on Twitter, because most of the bishops are boomers.
Yeah.
Now, I do want to point out the silent generation, the generation before the boomers, and their ages in 2019 are 74 to 94. So you can look and see, McCarrick is one of the silent generation, and many of the older, I guess, cardinals, bishops, they fall into that category as well. Now, I do want to mention the silent generation. Those are the ones that have covered up sexual assault. It's people like Wuerl, and even Pope Francis falls into that category, Benedict XVI. So we have a lot of examples, and the silent generation, I don't know, were they even really largely responsible for the Second Vatican Council? I say they have something to do with it. But
so if, let's say you're one of the older ones, 1925, when the council opened, let's just subtract 65, they would have been 40 years old at the close of the Second Vatican Council. And those people were by no means had anything to do with what happened exactly at the Second Vatican Council. I think the youngest bishops there at the Second Vatican Council were Bishop Wojtyła, who was Pope John Paul II, and Cardinal Arinze. He was a young bishop there. I think he was 35 when he showed up to the Second Vatican Council. I'm pretty sure he was the youngest guy there. So of this silent generation, those would be...
Well, Arinze would fall into the silent generation, but the older, like the oldest...
The oldest of the silent generation.
So we're looking at the greatest generation, the World War II generation.
The so-called greatest generation is the one who is... Those are the guys, for the most part, who were at Vatican II. Again, it closed at 65. Well, again, the earliest version of the greatest generation was 1910. So we're talking about the beginning of the Second Vatican Council in 1962 minus 1910 is those people are only 52 years old for the Greatest Generation. So again, most bishops are older than 50. So again, we can't blame per se in every respect. The Greatest Generation was not attending the Second Vatican Council.
Now, one thing with the baby boomer generation, going back to that, they make up a lot of the Novus Ordo attendees, and a lot of them are resistant to the Latin Mass, and that is why they get such a bad rap. Now, and rightfully so, in some cases. What I will say is, whenever I attend the Latin Mass, I notice one thing, and a lot of people say, oh, there's lots of young people, lots of young families, lots of babies, but I notice the diversity in ages, and I think that's a really healthy sign of really any kind of attendance at Mass. You have some boomers there, and they make up a decent part of the attendees of the Latin Mass. So boomers do get a bad rap, but I think it's really tough to generalize every single person into a specific category. Like my generation, millennials, most of us are socialists. I'm not, but most of us are. So,
maybe those without jobs are more likely to be socialist.
But and a lot of them actually, like, because you look at the popularity in Bernie Sanders, and
yeah, I don't know who his wheelhouse is. I'd probably say it's those younger than 27 would be the Bernie supporters.
And they fall into,
and maybe there's
some
category. Academic types who are older on the age scale who are into Bernie.
It might just be the people that use Facebook all the time, but but that's my point with the Latin Mass, and I'm actually going to compare that to the folk masses from the 1970s. Now, the baby boomers did attend the folk masses in droves, and that's one of the stereotypes of boomers as guitars, holding hands, singing Kumbaya in a circle. Actually, I did hear this horror story about how there were folk masses in the basement of a church, and they would stand in a circle during Mass.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I was horrified and traumatized when I heard that. But if you look at the attendees of the folk masses, they were all in their 20s, early 20s. That was about it. At the Latin Mass, yeah, there's young people, but like I said, all ages. So that's the difference.
Are you talking about the folk mass today, or the folk mass when it was introduced in the late 60s? Yes, it was all of that generation. It was pretty much exclusively for them. And even until this day, that generation, who is now gray-haired baby boomers, they're like the only ones who are interested in this folk mass. Why? Because they're playing their music. It's the music that was popular when they were in high school. It'd be like if you and me decided, well, we're going to make a mass and it's going to use popular music. Saying this when I was in high school.
Yeah.
Well, we'd be like playing Nirvana and Pearl Jam. Okay, you would have a Pearl Jam mass or a Nirvana mass. That's the equivalent for the baby boomers.
Yeah, electric guitars and
and heavy distortion on this electric guitar, and you'd be screaming emotional lyrics.
And you'd be holding up your lighter.
You could sing it. You could sing a very passionate lamentation about the crucifixion of Christ, as if you were Eddie Vedder or Kurt Cobain.
Well, actually, that's sort of what the youth rally in Indianapolis was like, and the youth conferences at Steubenville they have some drums and they're rocking out and songs. But
one remark I wanted to make is it's not. I don't know if I said this already, but it is not all boomers, because, as you mentioned, if you show up at the Latin Mass, you will see some boomers there. I would say that probably you're maybe 15 to 25% of boomers are interested in the Latin Mass. And the problem with them is that they were the first generation to receive the brainwashing of the Novus Ordo regime. So they were the first generation to be in the classroom when Sister Mary Margaret of the Sacred Heart tore off her habit and became Sister Joan Chittister. Or Sister Liberated Feminist with a lapel pin, who is now going to argue for women's ordination. And those bad nuns educated, unfortunately, a lot of the children of the baby boom generation. And a lot of these people have left the faith. Thank God some of them have come back, and some of them have discovered the old Mass. Do any of them remember it? That's one thing that's been pointed out. Only some. You know, I remember my mom talking about she maybe made her first communion in the old rite. And so, you know, we're talking about the people, maybe the oldest of the boomers who were born in 45, 46. They definitely would have gone all through high school with the old Mass. But then the younger boomers, they don't even remember it at all. So what's relevant here is, yes, that there are some boomers who have seen the error of their own generation, and they've been able to break out of that milieu, that cultural malaise, and they've said, I'm going to reconnect myself to the perennial tradition of the church, and I'm going to attend the old Mass. Again, this would be those who have been able to break out of the brainwashing that they received. And specifically, you know, when I talk about the brainwashing, these children of that baby boom were unfortunately taught that the old Mass is abrogated, it's bad, nobody knew anything about that. If we translate the Mass into English, or if we have it facing the people, if we have women readers, child readers, everybody distributing Holy Communion, communion in the hand, if we get rid of these devotions like the Rosary, adoration of Blessed Sacrament, some logic, they made an argument here that if we did all this stuff, that it would bring about a new springtime, people would really understand the faith, it would be very dynamic. And for the most part, the only people who have bought this story are those boomers who were brainwashed into it. Pretty much everybody else after that, they looked, it went in one ear, out the other. They thought and compared with their mind, and they said, this story you're telling me doesn't conform to the reality that I see, and therefore I don't believe what you say, that this is going to be a new springtime. And so hence what you see is often somebody who's not brainwashed of a younger generation, when they encounter the old Mass, it immediately clicks with them, and they say, oh, this makes perfect sense. There's something beautiful here, and there's some deep truths, and I need to examine this more closely. Whereas if you are from the brainwashed generation, well, the click happens and you remember the brainwashing and your immediate response is, that's bad. Vatican II did away with that. This is the new springtime. You're only going to drive people away with that old Mass. Nobody understands Latin, etc., etc., etc. And, that's the remark that I wanted to make. And if you find a Catholic of that boomer generation who appreciates the old Mass, then they have a lot of wisdom that they can teach you, because they would have been there in the early days of traditionalism. If they have been a traditionalist for a long time, from like the 70s and 80s, there's a lot of great stories, war stories that they could tell you, and they could also tell you stuff from their parents' generation if their parents were traditionalists.
So one story I just wanted to tell really quick is the story of the St. Louis Jesuits. Now, if you know the St. Louis Jesuits, they are a group of 5 former Jesuit seminarians. Yes, one left the Jesuit seminary to become a Buddhist. Another one, 4 of them were ordained, and it was Dan Shute who left the priesthood.
Don't shoot!
Dan
Hands
Shute.
up, don't shoot!
Yeah, he's the one, what was it? Let Us Build the City of God? Is that what he wrote? I don't know. But anyway, they were in seminary, and they were one of the popular folk bands around the early 1970s. Now, the reason they started a band was because they were just, a group of friends just hanging out in seminary, and the one guy had a guitar, and one of their superiors asked them to play music for Mass, and they said, well, we can't, because none of us play, only one of us can actually play guitar, and that's not appropriate for liturgy. And they were like, oh yeah, it is. And so they were like, oh, I guess so. And so they started writing music, and that's what it was. They were inspired by the previous generation. So it wasn't the boomers who necessarily, thought about doing this. It was people, from older generations who told them, oh, you can use your gifts to help the church.
It'll be a great idea. Think of the young people, how excited they'll be. Go ahead, play the guitar.
Yeah, and you shouldn't hide your talent. So if you can dance, you should dance at mass. If you can play the guitar, you should play the guitar at mass. If you can, yodel, you should yodel at mass. Like it just the boomers were not 100% responsible. Actually, they weren't even mostly responsible for what they were doing. They get a bad rap in Catholicism from younger generations.
They were brainwashed.
Yeah, and the younger generations, some of them see through it, some of them don't, and it takes a while to come around. And at this point, when you've been doing the same thing for 50 years, it's hard to get out of that habit, and it's hard to see outside of that box. So
I think, didn't one of those St. Louis Jesuits become a homosexual and marry a man?
We're not gonna get into their backgrounds too much.
I don't know if any of them are still Catholic. I think there's maybe one who's still Catholic, and he might be the one who's still a priest. I don't know. It's like a train wreck. It's a snapshot of the disaster of the immediate aftermath of Vatican II.
Yeah, well, I do have a good article that I'll post down below. It doesn't necessarily answer Ryan's question, but it does give you a really, really good background on exactly what happened. They did a lot of research, and they quoted them, and it's pretty unbiased, but you can tell, maybe folk masses weren't the best thing to do based on the article, but yeah, we just want to talk about the boomers today, and
go through the other generations here, so we can get the names of these generations and what birth years we're talking about here.
So which
we'll start with the lost generation there.
Okay, yeah. So I'm just going to go through the whole chart, and I can probably just post it on the screen so that you can see. The lost generation, ages 104 to 129. The interbellum generation, ages 106 to 118. The greatest generation, ages 95 to 109. And the silent generation, 74 to 94. And then you can just fill in the gaps.
Tell people the birth years there, and as we go through there, I'll say who happens of interest belongs to these birth years.
Okay, so the birth years for the lost generation, the years were 1890 to 1915.
Okay, let's stop right there. One remark I would want to make is you might say, oh, these are the great traditionalists, wouldn't they be? These were people who were born in the age of Leo XIII, Pius X, Pius XI, Benedict XV. They grew up into that regime. Well, let's take a look here. In some sense, yes. Cardinal Ottaviani, great traditionalist, defender of the Old Mass, cardinal head of the Holy Office of the Inquisition, was born in the year 1890. The great Archbishop Lefebvre, defender of tradition, was born in the year 1904. Pope Paul VI, by no means a defender or lover of tradition, architect and author of the New Mass and Novus Ordo, born in the year 1897. Pope John XXIII, caller of the Second Vatican Council, was born even before this in the year 1881. So basically, we've got a mixed bag here from this lost generation. We have some great minds and figures of traditionalism, but then there's also some who were anti-tradition and modernist.
And then the greatest generation overlaps a little bit with the lost generation. They are 1910 to 1924.
The interbellums are 1901 to 1913.
Yeah, no,
I think
that also overlaps with the lost generation.
When was JP2 born? JP2, I think, he was elected Pope in 78, and he was about 60 years old. So I think he was born in the greatest generation.
Yeah, I think so.
10 to 24.
That seems right.
Yeah, because he was a youth during the Second World War. Nobody on my list of the big names the short list of names that I made happened to be born during between the wars.
Yeah, so do you have anything else?
Well, I just wanted to say that even if you go back beyond the boomers mixed bag, even beyond the boomers, even more of a mixed bag, And I guess one remark that I made to you out there when I said you really can't blame all the boomers as a whole for this problem. Even their parents, okay, those people who were 50, 60 years old when the new Mass came out 50 years ago, this weekend, the first Sunday of Advent, 1969, those people who were older had grown up, and they weren't, they had gone to the catechism classes at the parish or maybe Catholic schools, and when the edict came down from high, from the bishops, from the priests, it says, this is the new Mass, we have to be obedient to the Pope, they says, okay, we don't like this Mass. There's all these changes, even, Paul VI, if you read those articles that were posted on, one was on Verate Caeli, the other one may have been on New Liturgical Movement, but Paul VI gave these addresses, and he says, you're all going to hate this new Mass, but believe me, it'll be okay.
Trust me,
it's going to be the best Mass ever. So that's what Paul VI said, and he says, we'll lose all of our great music, we'll lose all of our Latin, and you're going to hate it. But don't worry, because it'll bring about a new springtime. So the people who were older, 50, 60 years old, they're sitting there and they're like, yeah, Pope, we absolutely do hate it. I hope you're right that this brings about like a ton of vocations and all these converts and a renewal of the church, because we can't stand this new liturgy. And so what could they do? There was no internet at the time. Society of St. Pius X wasn't even established until 1970. People were experimenting every Sunday. It was like something new in the liturgy. And it was just like, we're Catholics, and so we have to go along with this new Mass. And a lot of people left, unfortunately. There are a large number of people who, when the Mass changed, just said, that's it, I'm done with this thing. Because whether they said the church defected, or this isn't the liturgy I grew up with, I don't want to attend, or the ideas were around there that, you don't have to attend Mass on every Sunday. That's so legalistic. This is the age of Aquarius and the age of new freedoms. And so if you want to sit at home and just read your Bible, that's okay. You don't actually have to go to Mass. So maybe that's what happened to people. Some people turned Eastern Orthodox. Some people turned Greek Catholic to avoid this mess. I think some people even went to Church of England or Episcopalians. So it's a mixed bag, and there's quite a lot of depth there. And the bottom line here is you really can't throw everybody into one pot or one wheelbarrow full, because there were many different ideas and many ways to tackle the problem that existed 50 years ago about the new Mass and Vatican II.
All right, well, thank you for watching, and go and build the city of God.
And comment, like, and subscribe to our great channel, John the Son of Thunder. Thank you.